Hello and welcome to episode 80 of Communicast, the podcast dedicated to enhancing communication skills. I'm your host, Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond. Today I'm joined by Olivia Savage, a culture and capabilities leader with more than 20 years of experience in shaping organizational success. In this episode, Olivia shares how a great communicator is like a chameleon, discusses why storytelling is so important, and shares examples of the power of emotional intelligence. Let's dive in. Olivia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
My pleasure to have you. Really looking forward to the conversation. So before we get too far into this, why don't you tell the listeners just a little bit about you, your career journey, and the great work that you're doing today?
Absolutely. So I have had the privilege of spending roughly the last 20 years within the learning and development field, really with a significant focus on learning, leadership, and change management across organizations like Disney, Nestle, and currently I'm with Kellanova, formerly the Kellogg Company. And really, I've gotten to play in all kinds of space, from designing large scale learning programs to integrating companies post acquisition. But my focus has always been on helping people and teams thrive during times of change. And so today I really get to play in a space of building competencies within our sales organization. I've gotten to build an AI certificate alongside Cornell University, which has been amazing. And I really get to help with this culture within our sales organization of fostering growth and adaptability in times of change.
Very cool. Sounds like some really fun stuff that you're getting to work on. And what brought you to this career in L&D? What drew you to that?
Yeah, so my L&D journey started at Disney, and actually I think it started before that. I actually grew up in the theater. I loved being in front of people and performing. And I got to Disney. I actually auditioned into Disney and was in an area called narrations. So I was on the rides where they had a narrative spiel to them. So I started at the boat ride in Fantasyland, where you had a little spiel and you had to talk the whole time. And I loved it. It was great. And then I became a trainer on that ride. And then I kind of grew up through the different areas of learning and development and kind of just stayed in that area. I think it kind of spoke to my background in theater and being able to get up and be with people all the time. And that's really where it started. And I've loved it ever since. There's not a moment that's gone by that I thought, I don't think I've picked the right thing. I think every day I get excited to get out of bed and do what I do.
That is so great to hear. And I think seems somewhat rare to hear that
Yeah.
people really are fired up every day when they get up and go into work. So I love hearing that. And I will say between Disney, Kellanova, Kellogg, and Nestle, just bringing back so much nostalgia from my childhood, just like pillar brands from my childhood
Yes.
growing up. So it's really cool to talk to you today.
Thanks.
As you think about your career, and I'm assuming with those roles, especially growing up with theater background and then working in Disney, and especially the work that you do today, lots of opportunity to interact with people, lots of practice communicating, seeing people communicate. So I would imagine you've ran across some pretty good communicators, maybe some pretty poor communicators. But if you think about it, when you hear the term that somebody is a great communicator, or that they have very strong communication skills, what's the image that comes to mind for you?
Ooh, a chameleon. Honestly, I think that's the first thing I think of. I really think a great communicator is somebody that can take ideas, complex or otherwise, and really clearly and effectively communicate them, but also they know how to listen and they know how to adapt that message to the needs and the emotions of their audience. I think sometimes people think that communicating is just, I'm just pushing out information, I'm just the mouthpiece of whatever is happening in an organization. And it's really so much more than that. It's about understanding people. It's about creating connections. And it's fundamentally about motivating people to action, getting people to do something at the end of that communication. So to me, a great communicator can adapt to all of those things. They can translate those complex ideas, and they can engage people in a way that makes it feel authentic and respectful. It doesn't feel like you're talking at somebody. It feels like you're having a conversation, regardless of sometimes the tough nature of what you might be communicating.
I think the analogy there of the chameleon is so spot on, because you have to be able to adapt to any particular environment, because you could have ultimately the same message, but as you go from audience to audience, you're going to have to adapt that message, whether it is the delivery channel, the delivery style, kind of the story around it. So if you're working with salespeople, the way that you're going to deliver it's going to probably be a little bit different if you're talking to the finance team, if you're
Yeah.
talking to executive leadership. So being aware of your surroundings and adapting the delivery style and channel and mode is going to be critical to, as you mentioned, move people to action, right? Because really, without that, if you don't have a clear goal for your communication and you don't understand what you're trying to do, it's just putting information out there into the universe and it's just going to fall flat. But if you ultimately know what you want someone to do and then kind of build and structure your communication around that, that's ultimately how you're going to achieve those goals and move people to action. And one of the things that you said there jumped out to me, and I would imagine, especially from the theater background, the Disney background, and then also working with sales folks, is this idea of telling a story, right?
Yeah.
So from your perspective, how does storytelling play into effective communication?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. Who doesn't love a story, right? A story is engaging. It makes people want to listen. It makes people want to hear what you have to say, and being in this world for as long as I have been, I've seen this concept of storytelling evolve over time, and to the point where now it's really at the forefront. If you can't tell a story with what you're trying to say, you're going to miss the mark. You can't just tell people information anymore. You can't show a chart. You've got to tell them the story around that information. You've got to give them the reason to care or the reason to believe in that message. So I think storytelling is absolutely fundamental in the way that we approach any conversation, regardless of where you sit in an organization. You've got to understand how to tell that story to whoever it is that's sitting in front of you. What story has to change based on the audience that you're communicating to as well.
Yeah, you bring up a good point of not being able to just put information out there. And it probably didn't work great years ago, but I would say,
Mhm.
especially today, where people are just inundated and overwhelmed with data and information. In essence, the world of information is at our fingertips at any given point. And people, especially in the workplace, are busy. They're moving from
Yeah.
meeting to meeting to meeting, firing off emails, catching up on stuff. So when you have the opportunity to get in front of them, sure, you have your data, you have your chart, whatever it is, you have your slide deck, but do you have a story that's going to be compelling, that's going to
Yeah.
have a meaningful narrative to it, and be able to make that connection for them? Especially going back to what you said earlier about taking complex information and making it relatable, stories are the best way to be able to do that.
Yeah, you want to evoke that emotion, right? Emotion moves to action. So I think storytelling's just that great tool to emote people to take action.
So, with the work that you're doing today, right, you're helping to build skills, build competencies across the organization, doing stuff throughout leadership and sales. What are some of the key communication skills that you really are seeing as being mission critical to succeed and to grow in today's workplace?
I would say number one is emotional intelligence. You have got to understand who you're talking to at any given moment. It can be the same fundamental message, but if you don't understand your audience, you don't understand what is happening, you don't understand the politics, it's going to fail. It doesn't matter how hard you work on crafting that message or that key point. If you don't have the emotional intelligence to adapt in that situation, your message fails before you've even begun. So I think having that emotional intelligence is just absolutely essential. And along with that is the perception and the challenges of everybody that you're facing. I know, being in the roles that I've been in, and in the organizations as complex as they are, we can craft a million messages, but we can't speak to everybody at once. You can't, that message isn't going to go across the organization and hit in the same way, because everybody in the organization is going through something different. They've got different goals, they've got different objectives, they've got the different things that they're looking at. And so using that emotional intelligence and that active listening and that understanding of the situation is going to be critical in ensuring that your messages are hitting. And I know one of the things that I'm a big proponent of from a communications perspective is crafting the language, crafting the messages, but creating a playbook that then it can get disseminated through your organization in channels that make sense. Not everything has to come from the ivory tower of HR or the leaders of the organization. And oftentimes that's where it fails, because we think it has to go through those channels. If we use our organization and we use people in our organization who are mouthpieces of what's happening, oftentimes that's the best way to communicate those change. So from a communicator perspective, knowing who those people are, knowing who the sales folks are that have loud voices that people listen to, go to them, have them communicate that change, give them the messaging. But being able to navigate your political landscape in your organization and understanding people, politics, position, where people are at, I think are the biggest skills.
Could not agree more. And as you think of communication, especially at a large organization, really trying to think of it through that playbook mentality, or the idea of, in essence, it needs to be a campaign. If it's something
Yeah.
important, it can't just be a one and done, right? You
Yeah.
can't send a blast out, as you mentioned, from the ivory tower, right? From the desk of the CEO. I remember getting messages like that when I used to work at a larger organization. And just expect that it's going to happen. Everyone's going to take action on it or buy into it just with one message from one person in one static moment of time. And that's where, as you mentioned, that emotional intelligence comes in. What's going on in the organization right now? Did maybe we just go through a round of layoffs, right? So I need
Yeah.
to think through my communication. I need to think through that lens. Is it the end of the quarter, right? It's the last 2 weeks of the quarter, and we're sending something out to the sales team. Being aware of what you're asking of your group during a very very stressful, strenuous time when they're trying to hit goals, or the IT team is going through a big implementation right now. How are we going to communicate to them? When are we going to communicate to them? What channel are we going to communicate? So I think having that emotional intelligence really to take a 360 view of this communication and who it's going to and how it's going to be received is, I think, mission critical, right? To getting people to move to action.
Yeah, absolutely.
Olivia, if I were to ask someone close to you and say, what's the one key skill that really has helped Olivia to be successful in their career, what would they share with me?
I think it would be the ability to listen deeply and fully, and to respond thoughtfully. So not just, I think oftentimes when we communicate, we I would imagine we've all had this experience when we're having a conversation with somebody and you can tell the other person is just listening to respond rather than listening to understand. And I think that's probably been my biggest learning, and something that I've carried with me throughout my career, is to really understand what is happening and to respond in a way that makes sense in, understanding the challenges, the needs. It helps me to then take away, go away and really think about the solution. Is it going to be relevant? Is it going to be impactful? Am I going to be able to adapt it in a way that makes sense? So I think those are probably, for me, have been the key elements to my success.
And for me, listening, truly listening deeply and responding thoughtfully go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Very, very difficult to respond thoughtfully if you haven't truly listen to that person. And one thing that you said there, I want to point out to people that is very important is listening sometimes will just help you go away and think about how to respond. So I want to encourage folks,
Yeah.
don't feel that you always have to have an immediate, spot on, fully baked, thoughtful response to some sort of situation, opportunity, challenge, new initiative, whatever it may be. Sometimes the best, most thoughtful response is, Olivia, thank you so much for sharing that. There's a lot of really interesting information in there. I need some time to think about how to best do this, best approach this. Let me process and get back to you.
Yeah.
That is oftentimes better than just the knee jerk of, well, you know what, I don't think that's going to work, or we've done this in the past, or yeah, let's go ahead and go for it, go do it. Sometimes just pausing, giving yourself time to process, respond, or say, I need some time to really think about this and get back to you. Let's circle back on this next week, or whatever it may be. But I really think that's important for people to understand. You don't have to have 100% of the answers 100% of the time.
Absolutely.
Olivia, who has been someone from throughout your career or throughout your life, quite honestly, that's influenced your communication style? Maybe it was just something that they did, you took, tweaked a little bit, made it your own, but who's someone who's had an influence on your style?
Yeah. I've been very lucky, I have to say, to work with some amazing, amazing leaders. And so I've had a lot of expertise and a lot of mentors throughout my career. But one in particular was at my time at Nestle, and she was just an amazing leader in general, but she was really, really good at understanding the politics and the political landscape of what was happening in the organization at any given time. And I remember when I first came into that particular role, I was focused a lot on e-learning and looking at how we can incorporate VR and AI into manufacturing and sales. And this is 8+ years ago. So this is before this is really a big conversation in organizations.
Yeah.
This is the very beginning of really thinking about how do we actually do this differently? How do we revolutionize L&D in these different ways? And I remember being so frustrated because I got it. So why didn't everybody else get it? Why didn't the leaders just say yes? I mean, it made so much sense. And I just remember her telling me, you get it because you grew up in this, right? You know this space, you understand this space, you know the story, you can see the impact, but you haven't brought the rest of them along with you. You're expecting them to jump in where you are now. You've had a year or 2 years to get there. So what she taught me in that moment was when you're communicating in anything, you've got to bring your people along. You can't expect that they're going to meet you where you're at because you're already there. You've got to approach it with the 2+ years or 6 months or however much information you've had to get there. You've got to remember that to the person sitting in front of you. You've got to bring them along the journey. You've got to let them know why it's important. You can't just expect them to be there already. And I think that's probably been one of my biggest learnings. And it's something that I always remember, especially in my career, in really trying to bring things to an organization or do something different or try something new. It's how do I bring them in the journey? How do I bring this group of people along with me so that they understand why we're doing this? They get the impact for them. They really want to dive into it because they can see all of the things that I can see.
Yes, meeting people where they are and then trying to bring them along with you is, to me, much more effective than you being where you're at and trying to drag someone along. I think of just from, say, going out on a walk or an exercise. If I'm going for a jog and I have my running partner and we're kind of together going throughout that, trying to keep that person motivated to go when I'm right there next to them is a lot better than if I'm 20 yards ahead of them, looking back over my shoulder, yelling at them, come on, let's go
Yeah,
quicker, let's go. Right. Kind of being alongside of them. And similar to what we've talked about earlier, how do we use stories, right, to
yeah,
get people to understand, especially something if it's technical or complex, rather than speaking through my lens and maybe using all the technical jargon,
Yeah.
how do I strip that away, use stories to get them to understand and somewhat kind of close the gap between the two of us?
Yeah, absolutely.
As we are closing up here, Olivia, what piece of closing advice, final advice would you have for folks listening to this, really just around the importance of developing these skills that we talked about today and honestly the impact that it can have on their career?
Yeah, I would say, communication isn't just a role in an organization. Communication skills are at the core of everything we do. It doesn't matter where you are in personal or professional life, communication is key. So I think investing time in developing those skills early is invaluable. Practice active listening, focus on empathy, really understanding where people are at, and then be open to adapting your style based on the audience that's in front of you. Ask for feedback from that audience. How did this land? Would you like to see something different? I think that's one of the best ways to improve. Said manager that I was just mentioning, I would go to them all the time and say, hey, how does I'm talking to this person today. Do you think that this is going to resonate? And, get that feedback, make those changes. And just remember that communication isn't about speaking. Yeah, it's about listening. It's about observing. It's about understanding the impact of your words. And in every role in your personal and professional life, in every interaction, all of those skills are going to help you to connect and navigate challenges with people. And I think that's probably, the biggest thing I can say, just focus on learning all of those things.
Earlier in our conversation, you talked about how every day you get up excited about what you do. And for me, that's what makes me excited every day to show up to work. With the work that we do at Communispond with helping people develop their communication skills, for me is so exciting because, as you mentioned, it hits every single aspect of your
Mhm.
life, whether you are with your friends, your significant other, your kids, your colleagues, your team, everything that you're doing, sometimes even just with yourself, like with your own inner monologue, right? These communication skills, whether it's listening, storytelling, understanding the other person's point of view, all of it touches every single aspect of our lives and just critical to develop those skills early and to keep practicing with them. Look at every opportunity you have to engage with someone as a chance to practice these skills, and you'll continue to see them grow just like a muscle.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Yes. It is a muscle. That's right. You've got to build it.
Perfect. Olivia, thank you so much for joining me. Really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me.
A special thanks again to my guest, Olivia Savage. Olivia's point about creating a playbook for communications really resonated with me. When you have an important message to communicate, it's critical to take a thoughtful approach to help disseminate it rather than the typical one and done style. As we close this episode, remember that mastering communication is a continuous journey. Make sure to stay connected with Communicast by subscribing so you can benefit from conversations with future guests. If you found value in today's episode, I'd be grateful for your support. Leaving a rating or review is a fantastic way to let us know the impact this show has had on you. Thanks, and have a great day.